Welcome to the Den, the Dark Entertainment Network. I'm the Gothic Rose, and this is the dark tale of the day. Let me take this moment to reintroduce myself. I am the Gothic Rose, hostess of the Dark Entertainment Network. This is a channel where the news meets conspiracy theories and makes babies in my brain, and it comes out my mouth. I do this because I enjoy it. If you like this type of content, please follow along, because I'm not going to stop. Hello, dear den fiends. Do you know the story of the worst woman in the world? This is New York's most notorious serial killer. She wreaked havoc in upstate New York during the late 1800s. Allow me to introduce you to the story of Lizzie Halliday. Lizzie Halliday made history. She was the first woman sentenced to death by the electric chair in New York, although her sentence was later commuted due to insanity. Halliday was responsible for at least 4 murders, including those of 2 women who were her best friends and her 6th husband. Something tells me she may have had something to do with the deaths of 1 through 5 as well. She had a history of arson and was suspected of killing at least 2 of her previous husbands, besides the 6th one. After being apprehended, she was sent to Matawan State Hospital for the criminally insane, where she continued her violent behavior by attacking and killing a nurse. And she was jailed just a few miles from my home in a now demolished jailhouse. It was only demolished about 18 months ago. It was behind a small deli. And that deli, ever since they demolished that building and have tried to sell the deli, 3 sales have fallen through. I think it is the ghost of Lizzie Halliday. Lizzie was born Eliza Margaret McNally in 1859 in County Antrim, Ireland. There's not much detail about her birth, any parents or siblings, but we do know that her family moved to the United States when she was between the ages of 3 and 8 years old. Her story is so complex. She married 6 times, and all 6 of her husbands met untimely deaths. But as we know, she has only been responsible for 3 of those 6 deaths. But if I had to bet money on it, I would say she was responsible for all 6, although the cause of all of these deaths do remain unclear. But Lizzie did attempt to murder her 4th husband, George Smith, by poisoning his tea. So when this attempt failed, she fled their home, which it's not telling me where her home was at the time, but she fled from that home to Bellows Falls, Vermont. And while she was in Vermont, she opened up a shop and burned it to the ground to claim insurance money, leading to her imprisonment in Philadelphia's Eastern State Penitentiary. Now, as you know, Eastern State Penitentiary has a very dark history of being haunted because it housed some very terrible criminals, such as Al Capone, the notorious Chicago gangster. He spent 8 months at Eastern State in 1929 to 1930 for carrying a concealed weapon, but he had luxury. He had furniture and oriental rugs and a radio in his cell. His cell is still on display. There was Willie Sutton, known as Slick Willie, and he was one of America's most famous bank robbers, imprisoned at Eastern State in 1934 and later escaped through a tunnel dug 100 feet underground. How Shawshank Redemption! And then there was Morris the Rabbi Bulber. Bulber was a member of an arsenic murder ring in Philly, responsible for at least 30 deaths between 1932 and 1937, and he was incarcerated at Eastern State in 1942. Leo Callahan, one of the few who successfully escaped from Eastern State using a makeshift wooden ladder to scale the prison wall in 1923, and Frida Frost, who was the last female prisoner at Eastern State, serving a 20-year sentence for poisoning her husband. She was transferred to the Muncie Industrial Home for Women in 1923, and Lizzie Halliday spent time there after burning down her business for insurance fraud. So this was no innocent woman. There are some incredibly interesting facts about Lizzie Halliday. One, most notably, ties into yesterday's episode about Jack the Ripper, where she herself, Lizzie Halliday, was questioned about being Jack the Ripper herself. She was under suspicion because of the similarities in the brutalities of the crimes, and being that she was from Ireland and traveled back and forth to Europe from New York quite a bit, they assumed it might have been her. Now, she responded to this line of questioning with, "What, do you think I'm an elephant? There's no way I could do that, except for the fact that in August of 1981, after her last husband, Paul Halliday, disappeared, the neighbors became suspicious of Lizzie, and they conducted a search of the property and discovered the bodies of two women, Margaret and Sarah McQuillan, buried under a haystack in the barn. Both of these women had been shot. Now, they were from the Philadelphia area, and Lizzie had a history of moving around after committing crimes and going to different places and committing crimes. So after serving time in Philly's Eastern State Penitentiary for arson, she murdered Margaret and Sarah McQuillan and brought their bodies from Pennsylvania to New York and hid them under a haystack in her barn in the city of Newburgh, New York. And that is where she met and married Paul Halliday. And that is how she became one of the absolute most notorious female serial killers in the United States, in the New York area. Amazing. And this story was not known to me for so many years until I kept driving by this deli with this little house behind it. And I asked someone around a local what the house was, and they told me that it was a former jail that housed Lizzie Halliday. I said, "Well, who's Lizzie Halliday?" And they said that is one of the worst female serial killers in history, not just in New York history, but in history. And the fact that the police even questioned her in the late 1800s, 1880s, about the Whitechapel murders, about being Jack the Ripper, just tells you the immense brutality that this woman had in her, like a complete psychopath. So that is the story of Lizzie Halliday. Let me know if you've known this story, if you know of any other female serial killers you would like me to look into. If you do enjoy this type of content, please subscribe and follow along. Hit the bell, comment, do all the great things, and thank you so much for joining me for this dark tale in the den.